joining us today. I'm so delighted to see so many of your faces and so many of the names popping up here. It's really amazing that you're here with us today. And thank you again, Anna, for the kind introduction, and thank you for having me here today. It's such a pleasure. My name is Pauliina Rasi, and I'm a copywriter and communications consultant. I'm based in Switzerland, near Geneva, close to Anna and Daniel's team. But I work with clients and organizations across the world, helping them with all things content and communication. And my own background is in journalism. I started my career as a journalist because I've always had this passion for writing and storytelling and learning, and what could be a better way to learn for work and being paid for learning and sharing my learnings with the world than working as a journalist. But when I moved to Switzerland 10 years ago, almost 11 years ago, that was also a little bit of a change for my career, because I come from Finland in Northern Europe, and then due to the language barrier and cultural barriers, it was not so easy to continue that work in Switzerland. And that's then what led me down to a path of strategic communications, working with mission-driven organizations here in Switzerland and Europe and all across the globe. And it's really great to see that we have a quite global audience here today as well. And I hope that we will have other locations catching up on the recording, because it's not so convenient for the Americas at this time of the day. But I could share my screen, and you will receive this slide deck after the presentation and the recording today here as well. So if you're facing any tech difficulties or anything else, you can catch up afterwards. And I'm of course open to all the questions later as well if you missed out on something or there's something that wasn't clear. But today we will talk about setting up and auditing your social media strategy in a way that it supports your mission and all the amazing work that you are doing. Let's see. Yes, here it's working out. I've prepared us 4 sections more or less today, with a goal of helping you clarify your strategy and clarify your message so that you can really get it across and make the impact that you're wanting to make in the world. We will start with foundations, talking about how to set up your social media strategy or evaluate and update your social media strategy. Based on your introductions, I hear that you come from different sizes of organizations, and your social media strategies might have different levels of maturity in a way, but I hope to touch base a little bit on both on the more on organizations who are maybe more in the early stages, but also give you some tips on how to evaluate and update if you are already working on a more established strategy and in a bigger organization. The next step we will be talking about is customization and content planning, especially for social media and in the context of social media. So when you have your strategy in place, how to customize it in a way that it works for your organization, that it works for your team, because you also might come from different sizes of teams and you might have different talents in the team. So how to make it work for you and how to really plan that content. Third, we will talk about the audit. So when you already have your social media in place and you are creating content consistently, you are growing your audience, how to audit and stay on track. And I hope this will answer especially to Ginny's question about the standardized process of evaluating your performance and engagement. And finally, we will have some time dedicated for Q&A in the end, but we will take a short break or recess at the end of each section to make sure that if you have any questions unanswered about that section, we can have those answered. You can use the chat if you don't want, or you don't have a good connection to unmute yourself and ask. So please use the chat, and then we can take the questions from there. And then in the end, we still have some time for questions as well. So to make sure that you leave today with as much learning and insights as possible. Okay, And well, a few things about me. I'm indeed working as a copywriter and content strategist and trainer for communications teams and marketing teams. My background is indeed in journalism, and what led me there was the deep passion to learn and to share those stories with other people. Then, since I lived in Switzerland, I wanted to direct my work to work more with mission-driven organization. So I worked for a brief while in corporate communications, but I felt that only using my skills and passion to drive sales didn't feel meaningful enough for me. So that's what led me to work with nonprofits and also with mission-driven businesses, social enterprises, and startups. Outside of my work, I'm a mom for a 6-year-old third grader. We've been living in Switzerland for almost 11 years. And as a big part of my work is really with small teams, early stage businesses, startups, I often try to adapt the strategies to small and early stage teams as well. And even for bigger teams, I like to highlight the importance of strategy and a strategic approach, because even when you have more people and more resources, you want to be strategic with how you use those to turn your vision of a better world into a reality. And a few words about my approach, how I like to approach communications and social media, and to really focus on the impact. So to turn those social media impressions into a real impact in the world. And I approach that through a 3-tiered model in a way, if you may. There's always the element of planning, which is a lot of what we will be talking about today: how to set up your plan, how to set up your strategy, how to figure out what to do, where to focus on, which projects to prioritize, which channels to prioritize, how to evaluate the progress and performance. Then once you have your plan in place, we won't be talking about that so much today. We tap into that maybe a little bit, but then you need to produce that content, quality content production, which of course overlaps with planning a little bit, because when you have your strategies and when you have your structures and routines in place, creating quality content will be much easier. And finally, there's also this third element of promotion. And I don't mean necessarily only paid promotions, paid campaigns, ads on social media and other platforms, even though that might be one part of your promotion portfolio, but the different ways of how you can grow your audience and grow your impact. Because often when you have your plan, everything starts from the plan and the strategy, and then you create the quality content based on that. That's often where many organizations stop, and that's where they miss out on really leveraging their content and leveraging their visibility. So it's always important to think about the ways to grow your audience, to get your content in front of more people, so that you can ultimately make a bigger impact and communicate your impact in this world. But that's enough about theory and the wider approach. We can start talking about setting up your social media strategy. And we can start with this reminder from Michael Porter that strategy is a choice. And strategy means saying no to certain kinds of things. And I like to start with this reminder because there are endless opportunities for us, especially in the context of social media. And often we are so used to the presence of social media in our daily lives that they can get a little bit lost when we start approaching and start looking at social media in our work. And we can start thinking that we need to be everywhere, because maybe we are using several platforms in our private lives, or people around are using those, or maybe other organizations in our field are using those. But if you want to get results and you want to use your resources well, it means saying no to certain channels, certain kinds of content, and that's okay. Because then only when you focus on the right things, you can really make a difference and make an impact on those selected things. A few words about why you want to work on a strategy, because it might often, especially if you're busy and if you're struggling to find time to all the amazing things that you want to accomplish with your team, it can feel like oh, do I have to work on this strategy? And where do I find the time to work on that strategy? But there are really 4 important reasons to set aside some time for that, even if it's just something simple and easy to create. But first of all, a clear strategy allows you to improve focus. Like I said just there, it allows you to decide what to say no to. So you and your team can focus on what matters and what really helps you, your organization, move forward and get your message in front of the right people. Secondly, a clear strategy allows you to serve your audience better so that you can provide unique value and also stand out, because social media these days, especially certain channels like Facebook and Instagram, they are very saturated. It's hard to stand out, especially if you're just starting out building your audience there. So when you work on a strategy, on a clear strategy, you can serve your audience better and stand out from the crowds. And this goes especially to small teams and early stage teams, but also for bigger teams in a way that when you have a clear strategy, it allows you to reduce overwhelm, because you can allow yourself to say no and know what to focus on. So you don't need to stretch yourself too thin, trying to be on Snapchat and TikTok and then on LinkedIn all at the same time, but you can really allow yourself to focus on what matters the most for you and what matters the most for your audience, because that's the only way also to really serve your audience well. And finally, what is often the bottom line for organizations like yours is to make an impact. Because if you're stretched too thin, trying to win it everywhere and be everywhere, it might dilute your message and might end up diluting your impact as well. But when you focus on a few essentials, really on the channels and projects that matter, it speeds up the progress and allows you to get where you want to go with your communications more quickly. Before we go to more detailed questions about the strategy and how to set it up, are there any questions or anything that came up? All good? Okay, just let us know in the chat or just raise your hand if you have a question, and then we can take those as we go. So I wanted to share with you 6 questions that you can use when you're building up or updating your social media strategy. And I will also share a few common stumbling blocks that many organizations struggle with. But before we go there, I would love to hear, you can also use a chat for that, but which channels you use for your communication. In the introductions, we heard that quite many of you are active on Facebook and LinkedIn. Where did my Zoom chat go? Many of you are quite active on Facebook and LinkedIn, but if there's anything else, you can also let us know in the chat. Do you still see my screen correctly? Because now I lost my...
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, Twitter is great for discussion, and especially if you're collaborating with journalists, that's a fantastic choice. Yeah, you have a website and Instagram. It's nice. Facebook, LinkedIn, and MailChimp for emails. That's perfect. My way back to LinkedIn and website. It's great to see that you're also working on LinkedIn more and more, because that's really one platform that's growing very much these days. So that's fantastic. Okay, perfect. Yes, so when you approach your social media strategy, and this applies in many ways to your wider communication strategy as well. So if especially if you're using other channels and in addition to social media, all this applies more or less to to that as well. So you can apply all these questions to your other communications channels as well. But we really should start with the goals, and this is often the biggest one of the biggest stumbling blocks, because as we use so much social media in our daily lives and with our private communications, it can sometimes mud things up in the professional context, and we can start thinking that we need to be everywhere and use all the channels that everybody else is using as well. But after all, it should be about your goals. What is it really that you want to achieve through social media? And what are the most important goals for your organization? Like, I believe it was the Moas team who mentioned in the beginning that you already have quite a big following, but you want to broaden your audience. You really want to reach even more people to advocate for important topics and drive donations as well. So having clarity on that goal and why it's important to you is often the first step. And this is a little bit different for early stage and small teams, and then more advanced teams. But also, if you're a little bit further along and you feel like you're already doing a lot of things well, but you want to make even a bigger impact and reach even more people, it might be good to come back to this question every now and then and see if you can maybe add something different to your mix. Because when you have a big established audience, that's great, but sometimes to grow, to get to that next level and maybe reach new people or new audiences, it can be good to try something a little bit different. And it can also be, and this goes mainly for those organizations that already have a more established strategy. So if you're more in the beginning, don't get overwhelmed by this. But if you feel like you already have a lot of established things in your strategy and you want to get that to that next level, sometimes it can be a good idea to try something a little bit unlikely and unpredictable. For example, I've seen government authorities and government departments sometimes using channels like Snapchat or TikTok quite creatively to reach younger audiences. So they have hosted like Q&A hours, office hours on TikTok and places like that to reach younger audiences, which is not necessarily where you would expect seeing government officials answering questions. But I think it's a good example of how you can sometimes mix things up a little bit. So if you feel like you're already doing a lot of things well and you want to reach new audiences and maybe shift things up a little bit, sometimes you can try this kind of creative projects of really doing something that you wouldn't maybe be expected to. But if you're more in the early stages and you're still setting things up and you are struggling to maybe get that reach and get that audience in the first place, it's often better to stick to the basics. You can still experiment things, but be careful with not overwhelming yourself and your team, because if you're only 1, 2, 3 people, it can get quite a lot. But if you already have the basics very well set up, it can sometimes be a good thing to stir things up a little bit. Secondly, and it's also worth reevaluating this question every now and then, even when you've been around for a while, but what is the real key value you can add to your audience's lives? And this is a big one in a sense that we often, when we are communicating about bigger questions, about big missions, and it is important to get that message across. But we should also think about the other side and ask ourselves every now and then, why should people care? And I'm not saying this to be mean, but just to be realistic, because when people are choosing which accounts to follow, which organizations to follow, they are deep down, they are asking themselves, what's in it for me? And that's an important question to ask yourselves every now and then. What's in it for our followers? Why should they care? And what can we do to make them care? And it doesn't mean that your missions aren't important and attractive as per se, they of course are, but the busier, the more popular the platform, more competition there is, especially Facebook and Instagram. They are very competitive these days. On LinkedIn, there's a little bit more space to grow still, and if you're present on some smaller platforms, the dynamics might be a little bit different. But especially on those competitive platforms, it can be hard to stand out. So think about the value and how you can make your content interesting and engaging for your audience. And again, this is a question that it's good to re-ask yourself every now and then to make sure that you stay relevant. And we come back to the channels just in a while, but it's also good to remember that social media landscape changes very, very quickly. And sometimes you can reach a certain saturation point on the popular platforms like Facebook, that there maybe really isn't so much room to grow anymore, and then it might make sense to shift your angle a little bit, start offering different value. For example, on Facebook, maybe divert from a company page, a business page as they are called on Facebook, to a group instead, or do something else differently to keep adding value to your audience's lives. And often when I work with organizations for which the advocacy is a big thing, like they want to advocate for important things and raise awareness, then I often like to remind them that sometimes the key value for you is to just maybe educate people a little bit differently, because there is so much information and knowledge and wisdom out there. Sometimes your differentiator can maybe be to simplify things, be the one organization that actually communicates about those topics in a client-friendly or follower-friendly, visitor-friendly way. So sometimes you can find ways to just package your message differently, and it can be really, really valuable in this saturated landscape. And thirdly, who is your audience and how can your content be meaningful for them? These two questions are, of course, very, very entwined. What is the key value and how is it relevant for your audience? Really knowing your audience and keeping in mind that your audience might change, especially in social media. Facebook started as something that was literally made for college students, university students, and nowadays it's more a place for middle-aged and older people. In these last five years, it's just kind of become the platform where everyone's parents are present. So it doesn't mean that it's in any way obsolete or passé, but you have to take that into account when you're communicating with your audience. Again, it doesn't mean that it's a good or bad thing. It depends who you want to communicate with. If your audience is 35 plus, 40 plus, Facebook can be super relevant for them. But if your audience is 15, 20 plus, 25 plus, you might want to look at different channels and again different types of content. Maybe your audience is educated and they want to read longer articles. Maybe they are super busy and they just catch up on things on a train on their way to work, and they just want to go through something very quick and easy to keep themselves up to date, but they just don't have a lot of time. So getting really intimate and getting to know your audience and taking into account how your audience might have changed. And if you want to reach new audiences and new kinds of audiences, what does that mean to your strategy and to your plan? And these three questions are often really in the heart of your strategy. Often I'm asked, really one of the most common questions that I'm asked is how can I reach a bigger audience and how can I have my audience engage with my content more? And if you're asking yourself those questions, it often comes back to these three things. What are our goals? How can we add value to our audience? And who really is our audience and what is meaningful for them? It really comes down to all these, to these three things. And I'm not saying it's easy. It sounds simple on the surface, but I know that getting on bottom of this, it's often not easy, and it evolves over time. But coming back to these basic questions can be really powerful. And again, if you are working on a more established strategy, re-evaluating them every now and then, and asking yourself, like, what is it that they really want to achieve, and who we are serving, and how, it can be very, very powerful. Then the next 3 questions, which are more tactical. Here we go more in the practical part, in the tactics, in questions of channels and content and publication frequency. And based on the first 3 questions and the answers that you gave to those, the question 4 is which channels to choose, which are, when you have clarity on your goals and your audience and the key value, this question becomes a lot easier, because it can be quite overwhelming to choose from a wide array of channels. But it gets a lot easier when you have clarity on who you're wanting to serve and where they are present, how much time they have to spend on social media. Millennials and younger generations, they spend a lot of time on socials, whereas older people might spend a little bit less, etc. And there are geographical differences as well. Well, it's not directly linked to social media, but I just read an article on how much people spend time on their smartphones on a daily basis. And here in Switzerland, it was only 2.5 hours a day on average. But for example, Americans spent almost 4 hours. It was like 3 hours, 45 minutes. And the Philippines was on the head of a statistics with 5 hours and 47 minutes or something like that on their smartphones every day. So also geographical differences can be between countries, can be really, really, really different. And here also the channels and the devices and the habits have some kind of importance as well. So getting to know your audience and how people consume your content can be really useful, because if they are on mobile, it needs to be something quicker, easier, faster to read. If they rather read on a tablet or laptop, it can be a little bit different as well. And then the question 5 is about the frequency and publication rhythm. How often, when, at what kind of intervals you reach out to your audience. And this question is very, very linked to your channels, because every channel is very, very different in this regard. Of course, there are some more static channels, like your websites, like you mentioned. They are typically something that you don't necessarily update very often, or maybe you just add new events, or you have a blog that updates every week or every other week or something like that, which is more static. And then on the other end of a spectrum, Twitter, that is such a fast-moving channel where you have to be all the time, maybe even several times a day, or you have to be very active and very interactive as well. Well, the newer channels like Snapchat and TikTok tend to be quite fast-paced as well, whereas Facebook and Instagram settle somewhere in the middle. And again, LinkedIn is more on a slower end, at least right now, where you can easily just have like a 1 or 2 weekly posts, and you can still get a nice rhythm going, because sometimes the discussions take several days, etc. So taking that into account is crucial. And another point that I want to make about the publication frequency and your publication rhythm are your team's resources, because you could spend as much time on each of these channels as you would want to. It can easily fill up your calendar and all of your colleagues if you want to, but you want to be strategic here and really realistic with your team's resources, so that you can keep up a consistent publication rhythm. And I often like to say that consistency is more important than frequency. You can be consistent once a week, even once a month on certain channels, like emails. You don't necessarily need to have them going out every day, or like your website, you don't need to have updates every day, but it needs to be consistent so that you can start building that loyalty. Because then when you build those loyal relationships with your followers, they stick with you quite easily. But if you fail to build that loyalty and that regularity, it might be hard to get that reach and get that engagement as well. And unfortunately, the social media algorithms play against us if we fall off the wagon and don't publish content regularly. So often we get penalized a little bit by the algorithms, so our content won't be shown to such a big audience, and it's just a fact of life. I usually don't like to speak about algorithms too much because I don't want us to get all tangled up in the details, because for me it's more about the big picture and really about the long game rather than quick wins and fast results. But in that sense, regularity is really important. And especially for those of you who have a bigger team and a bit more resources and you want to up-level your game in a way, you can, I'm not sure if you've already done this, but you can trial and test different publication times. I don't often recommend small teams, and in the early stages, I don't recommend you thinking too close to which days or which times are the best, because it's such a detail, and until you have the basics in place, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But if you want to get to that next level, reach that bigger audience, or maybe reach a different audience group on top of that you're already reaching, you can test a different publication rhythm. So is it better in the morning? Is it better in the afternoon? Is it better on a weekend? Is it better on weekdays? And what kind of content performs best? Like, for example, often videos perform quite well when people are watching them on a train during their commute, etc. So testing those things out. Again, don't get too tangled up on all this if you feel like you are still working on the basics, or you have a small team, or you're feeling overwhelmed. But when you're working to get to that next level, you can do this kind of strategic tests. But give each test variable, give it at least a week or two to test out, because sometimes there are just like, if you just do it for one or 2 days, there are so many variables. Maybe that day there was a big news outbreak or anything that kind of messed things up. So do it at least for one or 2 weeks and change one variable at a time to try different ways. And finally, I will get to your questions in just 1 second. Finally, what kind of content do you need to accomplish all the points above? What formats, what kind of topics and content formats and content types work? And again, I saved this for the last because it's more like a detail, and if you start with this, it can feel confusing, because you have videos, you have emails, you have polls, you got carousels on LinkedIn, you have stories on Instagram. There are so many different options. But when you work your way from the big questions to the smaller ones, this all starts falling into place quite easily. And it can often be helpful to think about only 2 or 3 types of content for each channel. So you don't need to necessarily do motivational quotes and polls and videos all on one channel. So you can just choose 2 or 3 things that work for you, and again, test them out little by little. It's social media strategy is always a work in progress, and in a way, once you figure all the pieces out, there's something probably that changes on the platform or with the algorithm, and you will need to adjust it anyway. So just take it also, it's good to approach it as a work in progress and as a moving target. And to wrap up this strategy part of our session today, I often like to finish with this golden rule of 3s that can help you focus your efforts when you're setting up your content plan that we talk about next. If you when you're making these choices, you can think about focusing on 3 channels, on 3 core topics that really go to the heart of the message that you want to get across, and 3 different content formats. as a kind of a maximum. You can also do less if that feels more comfortable, but it's often good to top it at 3, so you don't get too stretched too thin, and your content stays on track. And I see there is something going on in the chat, so maybe let's just take a few questions. Julia is sharing that the Chilean ombudsman has a sort of mascot that explains what the office does. That's great. That's the super cool, creative idea, and it's a very good example of how things can be done differently. Like if you are a official authority, it doesn't mean that you need to be super boring all the time, but you can really play around with it. And especially when you have a little bit bigger team and a little bit more resources, it's good to allocate some of those resources to testing things out and doing things differently. And then if it doesn't work out, don't worry, you just let it slide, and then try out the next thing. Hilda asks about an infographic that shows those details, frequency of posting, etc. So I'll share with you all this material, so you can see this, and I share also with you some articles that might be helpful afterwards. If you still have, want more details, or if there are still questions, please feel free to reach out to me, or if something comes up later, so we can always have a chat either via email or schedule a quick call to talk it through. Yes, and then other tools that you can use to monitor and track the data, like third-party tools, or do I recommend built-in tools on the websites? That's a good question. I often, at least to start with, I often rely on the analytics on each platform instead of setting up third-party tools, just to keep things simple, because you don't necessarily need anything too complex, at least when you're starting out. So to start monitoring your content, I often recommend at least a monthly check-in. If you're not doing anything yet, start with a monthly check-in. If you're already doing a monthly thing, you can try a twice a month or every week kind of rhythm, but start out with a monthly rhythm and focus on a few key variables first. Because if you start with something too complex, it might be hard to really figure out what matters. It's often easier to really start with something simple and then build it up as you start seeing what is relevant for you. If you're not doing anything, I would recommend that you start tracking your followers or connections, whatever is relevant on each channel. And then also the growth rate. So not only how many followers you got, but how many new followers you gain each month and what that rate is. If it's email, you want to track unsubscribes as well. So how many followers you gain, but how many you lose each month, because you want to keep an eye on that. But that would kind of be the first thing. How many people you got and how is that number evolving. Secondly, you want to look at which posts perform the best. And this is often the tricky part, because if you go into too much detail, it can be very laborsome and really a lot of work, and it can still be hard to really differentiate, like what does it mean, what makes sense for us. So you can just maybe look at once a month which were the 5 best performing posts in terms of reach and in terms of engagement. Those two things can be sometimes different, but I recommend to just really tracking the 5 or 10, because if you start looking at each post separately, especially if you post a lot, it's easy to get lost in the detail. So looking at the best performing posts and then making your observations each month. So what worked, what didn't work, and was there something special? Because sometimes you have, let's say you have a webinar or you have a campaign, and suddenly your newsletter subscribes skyrockets because you had a big webinar. Write that down so you won't be wondering next year, like, why was November such a good month for us, and why weren't we able to replicate that this year? So then you can start having that data and making really look at that big picture first. Then when you have the basics in place and you've been doing that for, let's say, on a monthly basis for 6 months, or 3 months, then you can start adding details and maybe making intermediary checkpoints every 2 weeks or even every week, etc., if you have the bandwidth. But often, honestly, unless you are really posting a lot, you don't necessarily need a weekly checkpoint. Maybe once or twice a month will be more than enough to get the big picture. And we will talk about the audit towards the end. So then auditing your social media, it also includes looking at those statistics, but you can really get started with the statistics that you pull together from each platform in one place. Then for those of you who are really active on LinkedIn, there is an app called Shields. I can add the link to the notes afterwards, which is specialized in LinkedIn analytics. Facebook and Instagram have quite comprehensive analytics built in. And yes, I would really, instead of going to any third-party tools, I would really first focusing on gathering the data in one place, because then you really have it somewhere that's easy to look at. And also often I just use simple Google Sheets or Excel sheets, whatever you're using, because it's something that everybody is familiar with. And even like when you have interns coming in or anybody who isn't very deep in all that social media landscape, it's easy for them to grasp the basics as well. I hope that was helpful, and please just let me know if there are any follow-up questions about that. Dan is asking about when to pay for ads and what helps to decide to not rely on organic audiences and organic reach. Okay, great. This depends a little bit on the platform, but first of all, you want to have those 3 basic questions answered, like what are your goals, who is your audience, and what is the key value? Because before you know that, and before you start gaining some kind of organic traction, you don't necessarily want to pay for ads, because then if you don't know what works, you don't want to pay for that. Then again, you want to go back to your goals, like what are your goals and what kind of ads you would need for that. If you want to grow your audience, it might make sense to promote your page so that you invite, what is your call to action? Basically, you invite people to follow your page. If you already have a big following, for example, on Facebook, you might want to boost certain posts to get your content in front of your followers. So make sure first that you know what resonates with your audience and you got those basic questions answered. Then get really clear with your goals and the call to action, what you want the ad to do. And then when you start running ads, start with small steps. That's really great with many platforms these days, that you can really monitor very closely whether you're reaching your goals and your targets, and then you can change the ad even on a daily basis. So you don't need to just get it set it up and just wait and kind of like spray and pray, as we used to say, but you can really be very, very strategic and get really close to those results and adjust. And only when you start seeing consistent results, put more money behind your ad campaigns. And again, this comes back to the channels as well. On Facebook, if you want to get an audience these days, you have to pay. It's almost mandatory. On LinkedIn, for example, you need quite a big budget before you can start campaigning. So you can boost your posts on a smaller budget, but if you really want to set a campaign to drive website traffic or drive traffic to your business page, company page, organizations page, then you need a bigger budget. So it's also something to take into account. Daniel had 2 questions. What are the ways to help increase engagement, and should content be tailored to each social media platform? Great questions. To increase engagement, especially in the early stages, well, you are not in the early stages, but let's start from that. If you're in the early stages, the best way is really to just be very active by replying to comments, participating in discussions in other groups, on other similar platforms. So you want to, or well, similar accounts on your favorite, on the platforms that you're using. So you want to look at the accounts that have a similar followership, but that aren't maybe directly in competition with you, so that then you can get there and add value, share your posts when it's relevant, etc. Both on LinkedIn and Facebook, groups are very active. So participating in the discussion in relevant groups and then getting your organization's name up there is really good. As you have a bigger reach already, you can definitely do a lot with ads to drive both to boost your visibility among your followers and to get new followers. You can even think about running quite targeted campaigns to reach different kinds of audiences because you already have a wide followership. And then one thing that many organizations tend to forget on their social media is creating engaging content. So creating content that it's easy to engage with your followers, using on LinkedIn, for example, using polls. That's great. On Facebook, you have polls as well, or you can just ask a question. You can allow your audience to shine, so setting up threads where they can share their questions, their insights, or just creating different types of posts. I saw something really brilliant on LinkedIn a while back. It was kind of this game, like a Scrabble kind of game, where they had a word there, they had inserted some letters and the followers had to guess the word. And it was so captivating because like, I have to get it. It's almost on the tip of my tongue. And then people inserted all kinds of responses that you see that they couldn't be right because they didn't fit, but it was super engaging. So thinking about ways to create engaging content and creating content that it's easy to engage with. And about tailoring that content to each social media platform, yes, it should be adjusted. If you're using very different platforms, it probably has to do, you really need to think kind of from the scratch. But many times you can just adjust small things like hashtags, which hashtags work on Facebook and LinkedIn, for example. Facebook and LinkedIn have come very close to each other these days. LinkedIn is more professional, Facebook is more personal, but still in terms of language, they can be quite close to one another. Then again, on Instagram, you want to be maybe a little bit more colloquial, a little bit younger in a way. So again, come back to your resources and then take it from there. Hilda says that they're using Excel to track which post is having a wider reach. That's perfect. I'm looking well as well, the best type for posting. That's brilliant. Often Excel is great for that. Dita is asking what I think about the mirror content, same content for different channels. Yes, repurpose and recycle across platforms as much as you can. So use the same core topics, parts of the same content on different channels, as long as it's relevant and works with a style of a platform, but don't overextend it, don't abuse it. So if it really doesn't match the style of a platform, don't force it. Sometimes it's better to just have fewer platforms and really have tailored content that can stand out than just have tons of platforms and just spamming in a way the same content everywhere. So look at where it's relevant and look at the specificities of each channel. And after all, it's your metrics that will tell you the answer to this question as well, like what works on which channels. Don't push it if it doesn't work. And also something to think, especially on slower channels like LinkedIn, because on faster channels like Twitter, you want to be active because a tweet dies in less than 20 minutes or 15 minutes these days. So you want to be active. But then on LinkedIn, for example, if you post too much, you can start cannibalizing on your own visibility. So instead of showing one post to a wider audience, LinkedIn starts showing several posts for a smaller audience. So you want to avoid that and avoid kind of like stuffing too much content out on your channels as well. Francesca asked about the algorithm, the criteria, and how to overcome that. If you have great content but it's not shown to a wider eye, it is a big limit. Yes, absolutely. So of course, nobody knows exactly how the algorithms work. And here the strategic testing will help you figure out what works for your audience. but you will want to optimize the time, especially when you have a wider audience and you can make those conclusions based on your data. Try to optimize the publication time, and also have a look at how different content formats work on each of your channel. Because on LinkedIn or on Facebook, for example, videos have been performing really brilliantly for a while. So you can sometimes just turning your content that you maybe have in a visual and text format, turning it into a video format can be really transformational and help you reach a wider audience for the same piece of content. There are, for example, apps these days that turn your blog articles into a text-based video. So you can look into solutions like that to optimize on the content types. What's been performing super well on LinkedIn lately has been the carousels, so the slide decks where people can browse through several visuals, or polls often perform brilliantly. But you really have to test these things out, and again, these things change. So for a long time, LinkedIn, for example, promoted articles. Now they are transitioning towards newsletters. So suddenly, just by publishing your article as a newsletter instead of article, you can get 4 times, 8 times the reach. So keeping an eye on things like that and testing them out can really help you see what works for you. And especially as you already have a quite a steady following, you can play around and test on things like this. And typically on all platforms, what algorithms love is the engagement. So if you can get people follow and will like and share and comment your post, that's often kind of a magic trick that can then lead to a much wider reach. And on many platforms, well, the specificities, they vary a little bit, but often it's the faster the better. So it's important to get that interaction there early on. So if there are any ways like optimizing the time and really finding the times when your audience is active, it can really make a big difference. Okay. So then I see that time is going super fast today. So then we can jump to the next part, which is more about your content planning and turning your strategy into a plan that works for your team and that works for you. Because of course, a goal without an action plan is just a daydream. And here you want to get very actionable, very tactical. And what is the real difference between a strategy and a plan, and which one do you need? I of course say that you need both, because the strategy is the bigger picture. It's your general guidelines, and your content plan shows you what to do on an annual, on a monthly, and on a weekly basis. It's a concrete plan that tells you how to get to your goals. Again, when you have a clear plan and clear structure and routines in your content planning, you'll have a lot less decision fatigue and overwhelm. And when you have enough details in your plan, it makes it easier for your whole team to stay on message and to communicate between stakeholders as well. Because often in organizations like yours, you have several target groups. You have to look at the public audience. Maybe there are funders, maybe there are private donors. There are often different interests, and you have to kind of manage all that. And when you have a clear plan, we will look at what it looks like just in 1 minute. It's easier also to make those choices strategically and communicate those choices, because you have a tool. You can say that, okay, that's great, your message is important, and on a strategic level, we've decided that we are using these tactics to spread it, and this is how your goals fit in our wider strategy. And I have a 3-level planning system that I often recommend that the teams apply, because it ensures that you have the bigger picture in mind, but also enough detail on a day-to-day basis. And in this 3 planning system, you have 3 levels. First, the annual planning that we start with, then a monthly planning, which is a really powerful tool for fast and strategic content planning. And then you have a weekly and daily plan that helps you stay on track, especially if you have a bigger team, if you have external contributors, and you want to keep all that under control, so to speak. You will need, and I will share again the link to this planning template, so you can download it and use it for your own purposes afterwards. And you will want to use this annual plan. You have a sneak peek here. It looks like this. You have the months and then different themes for your planning. And you will want to use this for your annual and 6-month planning in a way, to really set the long-term goals and set the long-term highlights, to make sure that your plan is aligned with your strategic priorities. And also, this is good to plan for the effective use of resources, because in this long-term planning, you can map out busy periods. If you have certain events or conferences or big themes, like big campaigns, you can plan for those and ensure that you have enough resources on those periods. And at the same time, if you know that, for example, there are slower periods, or there are periods when your team is on vacation, or I know that it varies a lot from different countries and locations to others, but it allows you to plan as well. If you know that the month of June everybody's away, you can plan for that in advance. So having this kind of overall planning day once or twice a year will help you make sure that all the strategic priorities will be tended to. Secondly, you will see this monthly planning rhythm that I have here in the image, and this is your content structure. If you only use one of these plans, please start with this one, because it can be really powerful. The idea is that here on the left-hand side, you list all the channels. Here in this example, we have Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, but it can, of course, be anything. And then you have here the weekdays. And the idea is to set up this plan for 4 weeks or 4 to 6 weeks based on your rhythms and your priorities, and map out which days you're publishing content, mapping out recurring content series. Like, let's say you have a monthly webinar and you have a certain promotion that goes out for that webinar. You can already map out that on a monthly basis, and then use that as a recurring structure that makes the planning easier in the longer term. And then you don't always, in the beginning of each month, you don't have to start from scratch and ask it, like, what are we doing this month? But you can just really look at, okay, the plan, okay, we have these recurring elements, then we only have to fill in the blanks, and that makes things much for you. And it also allows you, especially this monthly plan, allows you to check that you have the different topics and different content types represented in an even way, or in whatever way works for you. Or if you have several target groups, you have several stakeholders to take into account, then you have slots for each. And then it allows you to ensure that all those interests are well represented, but it also gives you a communication tool within the wider team to say, like, okay, we already have these slots filled up, and etc. So then you can stay on track quite easily. And finally, we have the weekly and daily plan, which looks a little bit like this. And this is really for the details, when you know what you are going to cover, which are the topics, which are the content formats, which are the channels. And you can start tracking here the dates, the channels, what is the status. This planning is especially handy when you have a wider team to work with, several people working on contributing to your content, be it external contributors or just maybe people in the wider team. So it allows you to communicate among different team members, assign responsibilities, and ensure that everything is progressing smoothly. And you can use that planning also for tracking performance, or if you want to have a little bit more detail, I suggest setting up a separate file for that, or a separate tab for that. And to come back to the content and publication rhythm once more, how much is enough and how often is often enough? Again, remember to adapt your rhythm to the resources available to your strategic goals. in order to not to stretch yourself and your team too thin. Often this kind of rhythm can be a good starting point. So having at least from 1 to 3 weekly posts on each channel, depending on the channel a little bit, remembering to set aside some time for engagement so that you don't only have time for creating the content, but to really have time to at least to respond to comments that you get, and also maybe to interact with other accounts. And one good way to fill up your content calendar if you don't have a lot of time and to tick off the engagement box all at once is to include 1 to 2 content shares in your content plan on a weekly basis as well. Again, depending on a platform. On Twitter, a big part of your strategy can be built on engagement and sharing, and on LinkedIn, sharing works quite nicely as well. Then on some other channels, sharing is less intuitive, and there you can maybe just allocate that time to engagement instead. Okay, before we jump to the audit part, are there any questions about this planning process and the 3 levels of content planning? As I said before, you will also have a link to that template, so you can use it and you can download it and make it yours and use it for your team. And really, if you don't have time or you don't want to use them all, start maybe with a monthly content structure, because then it allows you to set up that recurring structure that then makes everything easy on a weekly and daily basis. Yes, Francesca says they are posting each day on several times, sometimes every day on each channel, sometimes more than once a day. Is it okay or is it too much? It's probably okay since you have a big reach and you also want to stay on top of things and get your content in front of more people, especially on things you were using, was it Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter? Especially on Facebook and Twitter, it's probably okay. It's especially on Twitter, on Facebook as well. You could try on Facebook to maybe take it down for a week or 2, and also Instagram. Okay, perfect. You can try on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Well, Twitter several times a day, definitely okay. Instagram and Facebook, you can test it for a week or 2 to try to take it down a bit and see what the impact is. But honestly, I think it should be okay. You can try to optimize there to test if there are certain times that work better, if there are certain content formats or topics that work at a certain time of a day. So give it some tests. On LinkedIn, I would really recommend that you test, because there the risk of hurting your own reach by publishing a lot is real. So then there you can really test it to take it down a little bit. If you're doing daily, maybe take it down to 3 posts a week, then take it back to daily again to see what the impact is. And also if it impacts your engagement, because it's not only about the reach, it's also about the engagement, and especially on LinkedIn, they go very much hand in hand. But try to test it a little bit and see if there is an impact. But I would guess that on Twitter and Facebook, more is good. Every day or several times a day is good. On LinkedIn, I would give it some thought and test it out just to make sure. Daniel asks how to combine both planning and going along with trends, since they are pretty fast. Yes, a great question. It's always a question of finding the balance, but having an overall plan allows you to save some time to follow the trends, and it also vacates some time to work on something different and creative. So have your annual, of course, anyway, your annual plan is quite high level, so you don't go into detail, so it doesn't really impact that so much. But on a monthly level, I would recommend that you have for well, let's say from 60 to 80% of your content planned, and then the remaining 20 to 40% you you keep open for trying things out, doing something different, doing something spontaneous, and reacting to trends and topics that are trending. And also, if you want to really optimize your reach and you have a bigger audience, you can give it, well, you can also play around with the topics and really pushing out topical content every week. So then maybe you want to only plan for 50 to 60% of your content, and then work a little bit more spontaneously for the rest. But it's a good thing to have a certain part of your content plan, because then it will save you time, and it will also allow for this recognizability and memorability when people learn what to expect from you. Could I elaborate a little bit more on 20 minutes of engagement? Yes. So engagement, it depends a little bit on your channels, but what I mean is that it's important to go out on the channels that you're using and spending some time every day engaging with users. On one hand, it means things like replying to comments that you received, replying to maybe private messages, or whatever it is that, however your audience communicates with you. Of course, the details depend a lot on the platforms and the type of your audience and all things like that. But spending at least some time on that, and then on top of that, spending some time to widen your reach. On Instagram, for example, and on Facebook, it can mean following other accounts and commenting there. On Facebook as well, and on LinkedIn, it can mean following certain groups that are relevant in your field, participating in conversation there. If it's allowed by the group rules, maybe sharing your events, sharing your blog articles, and sharing your content there. You will want to remember two things. So first of all, the rules of the groups, because they vary a lot. On some groups, you're not allowed to post, on some groups you are, etc. So have a look at those. And secondly, remember to lead with the value. So it's not only about going out there like, hey, we exist and we are great and follow us and do this, but it can be sharing about your events, sharing about sharing your content, if you have blog articles, reports, videos, sharing something that is really valuable. And for some of you, it might also be relevant to do one-on-one outreach. It depends on the size of your organization. But for example, let's say you have an event coming up, it might make sense to use some of that time to send one-to-one invites to relevant people in your field. If you're working with journalists, it can be connecting with them one-on-one and following up with them, making sure they've received your invites, etc. But here it really depends. If you have a huge following, you can't possibly follow up with 40,000 people in 20 minutes. That's just not possible. But especially if you're smaller in the early stages, or if you have some privileged stakeholders like journalists or decision makers that you really want to forge strong relationships with, that one-to-one connecting can be really important as well. Great questions, and keep them coming as we move forward to the last part of my presentation today, which will be about auditing your social media. And for this, I will also share with you, we will share with you an ebook that goes you through the same process in a little bit more detail, so that you can have it handy when you conduct your own audit. But I will take you through 10 questions that you want to ask yourself and your team when you're auditing your social media. And remember that the auditor is a watchdog and not a bloodhound. So it's not about finding mistakes or problems, but it's really just making sure that everything is running smoothly and what works and what doesn't. Because when you're auditing your social media and your communications regularly, you will save time, because you can weed out the channels, projects, or topics or content types that aren't working, that aren't really getting the traction that you want to get. It also allows you to align your message, especially when you're using several channels, to make sure that your message is consistent across channels, to avoid mistakes and and spot the mistakes early on. If there are wrong links or the message isn't to the point or logo isn't up to date, you can pick those out quite easily and quickly without they cause you any harm. And after all this helps you to improve the communication because you have everything aligned. You know that the whole team is speaking the same language, and so are all your channels. And to come back to the planning routines and your auditing routines, this is often a rhythm that I suggest that you stick to at least. It's kind of a minimum. You can do more, and if you have a bigger team, you might want to do more, but update and review your strategy at least once a year, because as I believe it was Daniela who brought it up, that trends change so quickly sometimes that you will want to come back to these basic questions at least once a year, maybe even twice if you have a lot of moving parts in your strategy. Secondly, you want to conduct an audit at least every 6 months to ensure that everything is progressing smoothly. And you want to have a wider brainstorming and planning session for your content at least every 3 months. And in this 3-month quarterly session, if you may, you can also involve a wider team. So not just communications, but other parts of your organization, maybe some stakeholders as well, to harvest a little bit wider perspectives. And then to the details of conducting your social media audit in just 10 simple steps. We start by listing the platforms. Where is your organization present? And this might take a little bit more time when you're doing this the first time, but then when you have your audit, you can again set it up in an Excel sheet, a Google sheet, or a similar setup. When you have it in place, it's quite quick and easy to update. So in the first time, it can take you maybe from 1 to 3 hours, half a day, but then after that, it should go quite fast, depending again, of course, on the number of channels that you have. And here, when you're listing the platforms, you will want to think of everything. Your website, your newsletter, all the social media, but also third-party platforms or any other platforms outside your organization if you're present there. For you, this might mean, for example, different associations or different organizations in the field that are maybe linked to yours, etc. So think of those if there are other organizations that represent your field and also feature you and your organization. Think of those as well, because you will want to keep an eye on those, even though you don't maybe own those channels, but you will want to make sure that they communicate your message the way you intended it to be communicated. Secondly, now that you have all your platforms listed, check the branding elements. Are you using the same logo everywhere? Are the visual elements similar? The colors, the fonts? Does it look the same everywhere? And third of all, the introduction. How are you introducing yourself? Be it the short tagline or a long about us text, depending on the channel, you want it to be consistent. Now, there might be exceptions to the rule. If, for example, you're using different platforms to communicate with different audiences, let's say you speak with the general audience or to the general audience on Facebook, and then on LinkedIn you do something very specific with investors, for example. Those audiences might be different, so it might make sense to adapt your introduction a little bit. But if there are differences in the introductions, you want to make sure that they are really backed up and there is really a reason for those. The same goes to question 4, is the tone of voice aligned? Are you speaking to your audience the same way on all channels? If you're not, is there a reason for that? It's normal that you speak differently for people you want to educate about an important topic than you would speak to journalists who are experts and write about that topic. It can be justified, but if there is a difference, you want to make sure that there's a reason for that. Secondly, the next 3 questions apply to your content. When you're working on your audit, you want to check your publication frequency. Is it consistent? Is it realistic? Does it still make sense if there have been some changes in the platform, like how the algorithm works or what kind of content performs? And then check the key topics. Are your core topics still relevant? You want to conduct a quick performance analysis here. Are there some topics that get much more traction than others? Is there something that's maybe not aligned with your mission or message anymore? And the same goes to the question 7, are the content types relevant? What kind of content performs? Because this changes from one platform to another and from one point in time to another. So you can spot out some emerging content formats or topics, and then you can see that others are declining and you might want to take them out of your mix. And the 3 final questions are more about the details and the practical part. Check your links. I've had this offer where I conduct the digital presence and social media audits for teams for maybe a year now, and you would be surprised by how many times I've had to tell my clients that your links are broken. So check your links, because there might be, it's such a boring and stupid thing to do, but if your links aren't really working, you can really miss out on traffic. And it happens very often that for a number of reasons a link isn't working. So always check your links, or have an intern do it, or someone else do it if you don't have time, but make sure that they are checked. And while you're on the topic of links, make sure that the linking strategy works. So ask yourself where you want to guide your followers, and if that path is as seamless and frictionless as possible for them. And finally, when you arrive at the bottom of a list, you've maybe spotted certain things that need to be improved or changed. Create a plan for when you start working on those, what are the priorities and which are the steps to take to address all the things that you wanted to change and update. And I know that was a lot. I spoke a lot and I speak fast, but now we have time for the questions, and which are a creative act of intelligence, according to Francis Kingdom Ward. And I also share with you here my links. I can also put them in a chat. So even if we don't have time to address all the questions today, or if you have to, I'm happy to stay a little bit longer, but if you have to go at 30 past, you can always reach out. We'll share the links also afterwards. And there are helpful free resources on my blog, and I will also share that ebook to auditing your social media content afterwards. But I'm now all yours for questions. You can unmute yourself or just use the chat. I'll be happy to answer as many as we can today.
Thanks a lot, Pauliina. Maybe while people are warming up to ask questions, maybe I can ask a small one. Is it possible, like, to find out where the audiences actually spend their time and which social media channels they use? And can you actually help with that? Or how it usually works?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, it comes back to your the stage and the maturity of your strategy, a little bit of where you are on that process. But if you already have an audience, I would ask them every now and then, just by conducting a survey, for example, quite easy and quick, a few questions, maybe multiple choices to keep it simple, to check like what people say, where they spend time. You can also stalk your competition, so to speak, in a way, like look at similar accounts, look at similar communities, and see what seems to be working for them. If there's maybe something that they are missing, if there's something that you are missing, don't just copy blindly, but use it as an inspiration. And those are good strategies for getting ideas. But finally, you will want to test them, because what others work and what seems to be working, you have no way of knowing if it works for you unless you test. And secondly, asking people, it's a great source for inspiration, but take what people say with a grain of salt, because sometimes what people say and what they do are slightly different. So you will want to test, use stalking and use survey to build your hypothesis in a way, and then test it out. And then there's, of course, a lot of research, like you have general trends on what are the demographics on each channel. You can use that to get kind of a ballpark idea of where to start. But remember that each organization is different, each country, each location is different. So I wouldn't, it can be a starting point, but I would never build a strategy on the fact that on average, Facebook, it works on Tuesdays and Thursdays, because it depends on your audience. And if, for example, if I work on this one-to-one with clients, we can then combine several methods, from really interviews to surveys, etc. So if you have a little bit more time and resources, then it can go really detailed and really focused as well. But if you just want to get started, you can use surveys and look at your competition and then test out a few hypotheses to see how it works.
Perfect. Thank you, Pauliina.
Is there a similar webinar for maximizing MailChimp or managing email contacts? So that, I'm not sure if you have anything planned, but that sounds like a great topic. Great topics. Hilda, if you don't mind sharing how big an email list you have, I can maybe share some resources or tips right here and now. And I also have a few articles on my blogs about leveraging email marketing, and I'm also happy to have a discussion about that. Okay, you have 4 to 5K contacts, mostly partners. Great. Yeah, I can share. Well, you are already quite far along on your strategy, but I'm not sure how you have segmented that audience. But when you start having a consistent, a big audience like that, you want to start segmenting it, and so you can talk to different audiences in a different way. And also maybe think about a growth strategy if there are other audiences or target groups that you don't have so much on your list yet, but you would like to have. Then we can talk about targeted campaigns for those as well. Yes, we will share the planning documents, so you can download them and then adapt them to your planning. Yes, always verify the tags. Absolutely, definitely, that's super important. It's also something that's a little bit, it's a little bit, you often have to do it manually, so it's kind of time consuming and a little bit tedious, but really it's worthwhile, because it can help with your engagement a lot. And then if you tag the wrong association, it's just a shame. So a good reminder there. Yes, so Daniel asked about how to understand your audience. What are the ways to do this? So you can try the ones that I shared with Anna just a while ago. And is there something else I would want to add to this? Maybe conducting interviews might be something worthwhile for you as well every now and then. Just, you don't necessarily want to do it if you, well, you can make a whole project of it if you want, but often just like interviewing a handful of people, maybe conducting a survey first to get a bigger picture, and for example asking people when they fill in the survey, are you willing to give us a short interview as well, so you can kind of filter a few potential interviewees as well. So it can be a good way to deepen that understanding and those insights. Francesca asks about global comms. So you speak to people in different countries. What is the right approach in this case? So there are several options. Do you have, if you can let me know, if you have just one account, like global accounts, or if you have country-specific accounts and profiles as well, because that could be global accounts. Okay, great. So you can approach it different ways. You can, for example, of course, you will want to start with the commonalities. What are really the commonalities across all locations, so that a big part of your content plan really applies to everybody. But then only for Italy you have Twitter. Okay, that makes sense. So then you can start in that monthly planning and weekly planning. You can start allocating certain slots, maybe for more country-specific communications. to kind of ensure that you have something specific for each country, but you also have it spread out evenly. So that's one way to go. And as you have quite a big audience, you could start thinking about setting up country-specific accounts as well, if you have the bandwidth, because then of course it requires more coordination to adjust the content and redistribute the content. Or eventually what might work, if you haven't tried it yet, on Facebook are groups, because groups are performing quite well on Facebook. It could be a nice addition to your mix. And then you could, for example, start with a pilot group for one country, or for, well, if one country is too specific, maybe for one continent or a wider group of countries. So those are a few ways you can start at addressing that issue.
I think there are like more questions will be coming up as we digest and reflect on everything we learned today from Pauliina. And thanks really a lot, Pauliina, for your wonderful contribution and the wonderful presentation, which was super intense and really rich in content, and gives a lot of food for thought and follow up. And so just to say that perhaps each organization's case is unique, so the best would be to follow up with Pauliina directly, be it a consultation or a series of coaching sessions or workshops, or whatever works for you. And from our side, we will follow up with all who attended or registered, and share the valuable resources Pauliina mentioned and prepared especially for you. And just to say once again, thanks a lot to Pauliina, and thanks a lot for you as well for your questions, which really made it really exciting discussion and conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, and thank you for the great questions. They are really fabulous, and a wide range of topics. I know we covered a lot, so we couldn't really dive into details with everything, but really great questions and great interactions. So thank you for that, and thanks for having me. It's such a pleasure.
Thanks a lot. Bye bye everyone. Bye bye Pauliina.
Bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye bye.
Bye.